Okay, let's talk about reproductive barriers and speciation. So I want to emphasize first the reproductive barriers and the different types, and then different types of speciation. So of course you should know the three types of speciations, but and the reproductive barriers pre and post zygotic. However, what you really need to do is articulate those two together. There's an assignment about that, but that's the key here, is to understand how pre and post zygotic barriers can be the drivers of speciation in different contexts, right? Because the geographical context, biogeography, would inform what type of zygotic barrier are in place. Because remember the definition of species. A species is a group of organisms that can reproduce and give birth to fertile offspring. And that's like an important concept to remember. So this is just the biology definition of species. There are many different types of definition of species, the ecological one, the historical one, but we got to focus on the biological one. So a species is two organisms. We'll say two organisms are of the same species if they can mate, reproduce, and give birth to a fertile offspring. Is it two F's? I think so. Right? So that's the definition we'll operate with. Two organisms are the same species if they can mate, reproduce, and give birth to a fertile offspring, a or more fertile offspring. Biological definition of species. Okay. Ooh, we got it. So now let's dive into what could actually make that not happen. So you can influence the mating, the reproducing, or the giving birth, right? So see, in terms of pre-zygotic barrier, when we're looking at those, we're talking about habitat isolation, temporal isolation, behavioral isolation, mechanical isolation, gametic isolation. What is the key word that we're hearing over and over again here? Isolation, right? Isolation will lead to organisms not being able to reproduce, right? So if we bring back our little definition here, I wonder if we can make it. Yeah. We'll have to slide it down. You know, using technology, right? Boom. Better. So, keeping in mind our biological definition of species, we'll say they are isolated if we cannot mate, they are isolated if we cannot reproduce, and they are isolated if we cannot give birth, right? The pre-zygotic resolution, it means that before zygote. Zygote is after fertilization. So it would be about mating, right, rather than reproduction. So the mating can be in terms of habitat. If you have ladybugs living on different plants, of course they're not going to be able to find each other. So there's that aspect of a mating that cannot happen. Then you also have temporal. So if you live in completely different, if you mature at different rates, you're not finding each other when you are fertile, right? When you are capable of making babies or reproduction. You can also have different courtship. If you have a different song, all of a sudden you have incapability of finding a mate in an environment that's really noisy. Some organs for copulation can change, so that's for interspecies interaction. So some pollinators may not be able to to pollinate all types of sage because of the shape of the flower, the sage flower, which leads the population of sage flowers to not be able to reproduce with each other because pollen is carried from one plant to the next by pollinators. So if a plant starts changing the shape of its flowers, all of a sudden it cannot reproduce with other plants that have the same different shape. That's assuming there is not a capacity of wind to carry the pollen, right? Because not all plants use wind. Many other factors get into that, right? And gametic isolation, the gametes cannot make a zygote. So here you have it. you have a complete isolation due to those factors. So try to wrestle with those in your mind, and then we'll switch to the post-zygotic. So we are already at the zygote stage. We have a zygote here. Now we're asking, is that zygote fertile, basically? So you have different types. You have a hybrid inviability, you have a hybrid infertility, you have a hybrid breakdown. So in terms of the reproduction breakdown, that would be the hybrid breakdown. If you cannot even reproduce because of abnormal genitalia, there's a reduced fitness of the hybrid. That's an incapability of reproducing. So they're not of the same species as their parents, right? Or the parents are not of the same species. The parents giving birth to hybrids like that. Then you have in the hybrid infertility, so they're completely sterile. Think about the liger, lion and tiger. They cannot make babies by ligers, which means tigers and lions are not the same species as defined by the biological definition of species up there. And finally, the hybrid inviability, offspring do not reach maturity. So, for example, eucalyptus seeds and seedlings, they just cannot spread. So, eucalyptus making seeds with other eucalyptus of different species, that they can make the seeds, but the seeds never spread. So, you have hybrid inviability. That's post-zygotic. The zygote has been formed, the seed has been made, the liger is born, the mosquitoes are born. They are respectively incapable of spreading, incapable of making babies, or incapable of mating due to incapacity to have the right mating organs. So that gives us pre and post-zygotic barrier, right? And those then are applied into that realm here of speciation. So you have different types of speciation. We have the allopatric, parapatric, and sympatric. Let's break it down. If you have, let's speak about the word patric. Patric will be kind of location. If we think of think about paramilitary, it's on the edge, on the outskirts of military. It's not really military. So here it would be things at the edge. So when two populations are edging, they share a border, right? So parapatric means there is population border sharing. Between two populations, they share a border, but yet they speciate. Sympatric speciation, sympathetic together, sympa in French means cool, but sympathetic means things that are jovial and nice, if you want. So that's how you want to remember it, which means there is an overlap of the two populations. There's a continuous contact between the two populations. And then allopatric. Think about allo, what you say on the phone, which means you need to call someone they're far away, right? So allopatric, two populations are separated. And they can be separated by a mountain. For example, they can be separated by a sea, for example. So now those are just type of speciation, but now the mechanism of the speciation depends on the type, but can overlap, right? So when we go back to our mechanisms here, pre and post-zygotic isolation, you may think of habitat isolation here as a perfect example for allopatric speciation. And yes, allopatric doesn't have to be a mountain. Different flowers, different plants. It doesn't need a mountain. It's all that scale. An insect scale is very different from a plant that can move by the winds, right? An insect can move, but with the size of the insect, it indicates the type of speciation. So allopatric could be due to that. Now, could you have an allopatric speciation in terms of behavioral courtship? You certainly could if the call cannot be heard across a chasm. Now, those calls will need to evolve on their own independently, right, to then differentiate. Because if the call is still the same, taking a population of those frogs from one side of the chasm to the other side and show that they can still mate because they can still call each other, you don't have speciation yet. But the conditions are there with the chasm. However, the behavioral isolation usually is more in line with our sympatric speciation, simply because the sympatric speciation have overlap of population. It's simply that when you have sympatric speciation, you don't have habitat isolation. You could have temporal isolation, but you probably likely have behavioral isolation, mechanic isolation, or kinetic isolation, assuming we have speciation, right? It doesn't require, even speciation doesn't have to happen. But if it happens, the mechanism will vary based on the type, right? So if populations are totally overlapping, chances are it could be temporal isolation, chances are it can be mechanical isolation or behavioral isolation, gametic isolation as well. And finally, the parapatric speciation, when you have an age that is being shared, those examples here can still contain it could be any of the pre-zygotic isolation. It could be. Of course, the post-zygotic isolation is possible at all different type of speciation. It is all about a randomness of evolution, right? So I want you to take away that some of those barriers can happen at different based on the scale in different types. So you don't want to think about speciation as either allopatric, parapatric, or symmetric. Those are as types of speciation. However, you also need to think about the mechanism of the speciation. So let's go through some examples. If you look at those tortoises here, the tortoises are just land turtles that water turtles, if you will. So the tortoise from the different islands here, they have moved, and then from one island to the next, and then one of those islands they have speciated just because of isolation physically. So this is a perfect example of allopatric speciation. Now the mechanism behind that, you just have to put the two turtles together from different islands and see what happens. Can they mate? Can they not mate? Are the hybrid maybe breaking down? Maybe the hybrids are not fertile. Maybe they use a different call for calling a mate, so they don't even recognize the other tortoise as of the same species. Maybe they use a different pheromone. Maybe they mate at different times. You see what I'm saying? The mechanism can be varied, but the type is definitely allopatric because there is that barrier between all those populations, be it the little ocean. When you then now focus on that example of bird here, you notice something really interesting. Population in the equatorial rainforest are sharing border with that ecotone of forest grassland with the population in the grassland, more grassland type of habitat. So there is an age, and an age between two populations means that you're going to have parapatric speciation. Now, the mechanism for parapatric speciation could be the time of reproduction. It could be the babies are not fertile. It could be that they use a different call now. The mechanism can be different, but the type of speciation here is going to be parapatric speciation. And since the habitat is different, you could think of simply they start to mate on the ground, whereas they still mate in the trees. So if you take one of the birds from the grassland, put it in the forest, they won't mate with anyone on the ground because all the birds are in the trees. That would be an habitat isolation, right? Pre-zygotic barrier. But it could be a lot of other things. It's all about imagination for some assignments when I ask you to come up with an example. And in real life, when you go out there and look at the population, you just have to test those things. So you would put the animals together from two different populations and you would test, can you reproduce? Do we find some birds from that population mating with that population? If we do, maybe it's just habitat isolation. They live in different habitat now, although they're sharing a border. So the speciation is a slower process, right? Because they're still mixing between the two populations. And finally, for sympatric speciation, we can look at an example in lake of fish. So if you go in the lake Ejagan here, that is in Cameroon, you will find that you have shallow area and deep area. And fish from the different populations are now evolving different body shapes, right? And so in shallow water, they have a larger body, and in deep water, they have a smaller body. This is not parapatric speciation. It's sympatric speciation because fish can still completely navigate all of the waters. There's no separation. There's not really an age between population. The shallow water fish, having a larger body, do go into the depth as well. So they're completely overlapping. However, you do have a speciation that is happening and you see different morphs. Now, the mechanism of that speciation could be that the deep water fish only reproduce at the depth, whereas the shallow water started to reproduce only on the sides, and they still use the entire lake, right, to live, but they reproduce at different places. So since they do external reproduction, the eggs of the female laid on the shallows only are fertilized by males laying their sperm on the shallows, and respectively for the depths, right? So mechanism can vary, but the important here to realize the two populations are sharing the entire lake, so they're completely in sympatric situation. So yeah, here you have it. Think about all those barriers as mechanisms, and the type is more about the habitat. But don't get stuck on the mountain. The mountain is an example. It doesn't have to be a mountain. Think about the ladybug in different plants, for example, right? So you have to use your imagination to think about those things, but rely on example, come up with your own example, quiz each other on types of speciation out there. It's easy enough to Google some types and just ask someone based on a case study and say like, what do you think is the speciation there and the mechanism? Okay, I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.